Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for showing up on this beautiful day to Champaign-Urbana. It's my pleasure to introduce David Forsyth, who is going to be our first speaker. David is a full professor at the Computer Science Department at UIUC. He spent some time as faculty at Berkeley, and he's probably most well known for his textbook, which is the Computer Vision, a Modern Approach, which is commonly used in most of the courses that are taught on this area. He's written numerous papers and really excited to hear what he has to talk about today.
Thank you, Varun. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I apologize for the fact that if you look very closely, you might be able to see email of me slanging my colleagues or something equally interesting, but that has to do with the whole complicated world of 4x3 and 16:9. I'm going to talk about what image generators know. This is, if you like, a kind of publicity talk for my ex-student Anand Batad, who is currently at TTIC. Other contributors at Lana Lazebnik student Daniel McKee, Yuzhong Wang student Yuan Yizhong, Yuzhong Wang, and Derek Holm. So generally, I like to tell people the points that I'm going to make at the start, and we'll kind of visit these points as we hit them, so that if you doze off, then you can kind of wake up and you know where you are. So first point, vision is flourishing. We're really good at generating images. It's not absolutely clear whether this is a cute trick designed to relieve venture capitalists of their money or whether there is something substantial there. But at least one state-of-the-art image generator knows an awful lot of stuff that is slightly surprising that it would know. Others seem to know that kind of stuff as well, and they might turn into very, very good regressors. And we'll go through these points. So vision is flourishing. Something I do to annoy my colleagues is show this list of influential venues of publication in science. The top one is Nature. It's kind of hard to get into, but the really hard to get into is CVPR, which is number 5 in science in terms of citation impact. Right? So vision really is just growing like Topsy. We're more visible than Cell and slightly less visible than the New England Journal of Medicine, which is kind of fun. Illinois has a long tradition of excellence in computer vision. Tom Huang was here, Narendra Ahuja was here, I'm here, my junior colleague Derek Holm. I'm sort of the famous old guy. Less old guys are Derek and Lana. Working their way in that general direction is Alex, Saurabh Gupta, and then new recent hires who are in the process of becoming famous old guys are Lina Gui, Shenlong Wang, and Yuzhong Wang. And we have kind of a happy community of students as well. We had a big vision seminar here a couple of months ago, and it's a huge and cheerful student community. Okay, image generation works really well. Here's one way you could do it. You take a neural network, you give it random vectors, and then you basically smack it until the random vectors turn into images. And you do that with an adversary that looks at what comes out of the network and says, hey, that isn't an image, change what you're doing. That's StyleGAN. There are all sorts of kind of architectural issues, but it's really pretty good at producing images. And those images are now quite convincing. So I've shown a whole bunch of StyleGAN faces. If you're in the know, what you do is you look at the earlobes. StyleGAN still doesn't know that the left earlobe tends to look like the right earlobe reversed, and it's a bit funky about whether people who have earrings in their left ear have earrings in their right. Now, there are other ways of generating images as well, and we'll see later on what they are and that they're knowledgeable. The images, you can get control of image generation with text. So this nominally acrylic painting, it's controlled by text that says a portrait of a human growing colorful flowers from her hair, hyper-realistic oil painting, intricate details. And then when you generate these images, you can generate them in ways that allow them to blend as well. So we have a technology here which really can do an awful lot of stuff. We can do interior scenes. For some reason, those have been popular since the start. There are very good data sets of pictures of interior scenes, and you can generate images of interior scenes. They're pretty compelling. Not only that, you can actually control the thing. And to think about how you control it, you want to think about how StyleGAN actually works. So you'll see there's a little network over in the corner there. It's receiving N01 normal random vectors. They go into a mapping network. That makes a thing that is called a style code. And that code is fed into a synthesis network. The code basically says, this is what I want each layer to look like. And out of the synthesis network comes something that is supposed to be an image. Now, what we're going to do is reach in and fiddle around with the style code. If we fiddle around with the style code, it turns out that you can get various effects, right? So it is known that by changing the style codes, you can change the layout of the picture that you produce. You can see the layouts changing over there. You can change the kind of picture. So you can go from a bedroom to something a little bit odd to a living room. You can change the lighting, although the lighting changes are not that compelling because the albedo is changing as well, which is annoying. You can generate clouds and vegetation, and you can change the interior decoration under aging. So that's kind of fun. We can make StyleGAN do specific things. Okay, what I'm going to demonstrate now is that actually StyleGAN knows a bunch of stuff about the world of pictures without actually ever having been trained to do that. So this is work, Anand did the work. You can see some trouble caused by 16:9 and 4:3 over there. It's on archive. What we're going to do is we are going to change the lighting in the scene. But it's very important when you change lighting that you don't change anything else, right? So I want to change the lighting, but I don't want to change the position of the furniture. I don't want to change the color of the curtains. I don't want to change any other structure. How do I know that that hasn't changed? Well, what I can do is find a procedure that will decompose an image into albedo and shading. And those things, they're a little bit shaky right now, but they do exist. I will take my putative relighted image. I will check, did the albedo change? If it did, then the thing that I added to the style code was wrong. If it didn't, then maybe that's a good idea. Then I will search for things to add to the style code that change the shading but don't change the albedo. And the search is pretty basic. I don't have to do any complicated searching. I'll just sling in a whole bunch of directions and keep the ones that I like. If you do that, you can get things that relight scenes in fairly convincing ways. So you'll see that in the top row, the lighting is moving around in the room. You can increase the lighting, you can decrease the lighting, and rather pleasingly, when you increase the lighting, if you look at the fourth column, you'll see that the increased lighting is being caused by a light bulb in the light fitting on the nightstand getting brighter. So whatever is going on in here, the thing has some knowledge or understanding or whatever of covariances of very, very complex physical structures. In the bottom row, you can see in the fourth column, when the room is lit from the side, the window gets brighter and the shadows get darker, suggesting a different position of the sun. In the second column in the bottom row, you can see one of the lamps lighting up. So this thing has strong and sensible opinions about where light comes from, which is not an obvious fact. They're really quite nice looking relighting. So you can take these generated scenes, you can relight them in a whole bunch of different ways, and they kind of look like the original scene with new lighting in it. The lighting isn't always what you would choose to light that scene. So another thing that's kind of fun here is relighting tends to break all our methods for evaluating generated images. And the reason it breaks those methods is it generates images that are physically plausible, that appear to be physically plausible, but that you wouldn't see because the lighting is wonky, right? Photographers don't take them, and as a result, the curation of data sets that you would test against doesn't contain those effects. So now, this suggests the following line of thought. If I can change the lighting in an image, I must know a great deal of stuff about the world of the image. I need to know things like normal and surface properties to think about lighting. and I probably need to know something about depth. So there's a decent chance that this stuff is lurking around inside StyleGAN somewhere. Okay. Does it? And the answer is it should. It's kind of obvious that it should. The thing that is astonishing is it can be forced to produce this information. Right? So Anand and Daniel and Derek and I demonstrated that you can get normal and depth and albedo out of StyleGANs just by manipulating those codes. So there's a picture on the one side, and then you'll see next to it normals. So the colors tell you the orientation of the surface normal. The purple ones are pointing up, the green ones are pointing one side, the orange ones are pointing the other side. And that normal field is really pretty good. You can see a depth map that it's produced. You can see it's produced an albedo map, and it's actually done a semantic segmentation of, in this case, light bulbs or light sources. Question, how does it know where the light sources are? Answer, because it put them there. The thing that's kind of fun is these normals, depth, albedo, shading, and segmentation are competitive with the best single image normal, single image depth, single image albedo, single image shading predictors, and they rather beat the segment. Right? Why is it better at finding light bulbs? Well, it put them there, it didn't just have to look at the image to see where they were. And this is true over lots of images, and you can get numbers. It's really quite well behaved. Why does it know the normals in such detail? You'll notice over here that the normals for StyleGAN are very much more detailed on the pillows than the normals from single image normal predictors. Why is it so good? Well, again, it made those surfaces. It should know what their normals are. Okay, now, an interesting point is this isn't just StyleGAN. So the first thing you want to know is we didn't train the StyleGAN. We picked it up on the internet, as one does, and we just beat it up until it made normals and depth and albedo and stuff. That suggests that all StyleGANs know this stuff, unless we were absurdly lucky in the thing we found on the internet. What one can ask is, do other generators know this kind of stuff as well? There's another important question here, which is the semantics of the word know, which we won't go into. So there are other methods to generate images. A diffusion method, that's the sort of basis of stable diffusion, is essentially take some noise, repeatedly denoise it with a clever method until it looks like an image and declare success. You can generate very good, very, very impressive images like that, and you can control the images that you generate. The control methods used to be a bit ropey. They're improving by leaps and bounds. The neat thing is these know normals too. So some very neat work by Anand and Greg Shiknarovich, who's in the audience, and Sharon Du and Nick Colkin, shows that stable diffusion methods know about normals as well. So up at TTIC a bunch of years ago, they collected a whole bunch of very, very detailed depth and normal images of 3D scenes called the diode data set. These guys can beat normals out of stable diffusion, second row. State-of-the-art normals, right? Single image normal predictors are the third row, and they're really pretty good, but they're not as good as the stable diffusion normals, and both of them are very, very close to ground truth, but stable diffusion is closer. So again, I'm suppressing the semantics of how this was extracted, and the question of how the word know is used becomes interesting here. But the plain fact is, lurking around inside these networks are representations of things that we didn't necessarily realize they knew. Now, there's more evidence in this form as well from Oxford. So they're looking at stable diffusion. What does it know about the 3D scene? And the question they're interested in is there global structural information available about a scene? So here what we're going to do is you'll see an original image, and I'm going to in-paint that image. So I will simply remove all the pixels in the in-painting mask. And then if you look at the masked image, the question is, when stable diffusion reconstructs the pixels inside the mask, does it make a sensible shadow, knowing the light direction, or is the shadow wonky? And you can see the shadow is really pretty good. The neat thing about this is the shadow isn't perfect, but people are really bad at assessing shadows. So if I wanted to claim that the shadow was pretty close to perfect, I'd be in good shape, right? If you look at the second row, we're going to knock out that, it's English academia. I think that might be an overhead projector. An overhead projector on a cart. We're going to knock that out, and then Stable Diffusion will in-paint some stuff. Question, when it in-paints stuff, does the stuff respect the wall and respect the floor, or is it just floating in space? And the answer is it respects the wall and respects the floor, which suggests that this thing has some overall geometric theory about how the scene is composed. Now, you can go a little bit further. The methodology is kind of fun. They're going to mark up a standard data set with geometric properties. And then they're going to ask, lurking around in that denoising process somewhere, are there features that predict the markup? So the kind of markup you can do is, in this case, are these two patches on different planes? Or, sorry, the same plane. The second column shows a blue patch that's on the ground plane. Third column shows another blue patch that's on the ground plane. Fourth column shows a negative pair. Second row is, are these two on different planes? So now what I can do is I can say, I've got this markup. I know these bits of images. Can I find features in Stable Diffusion that predict this property? And the answer is yes. Rather better than you can predict this property using other standard important image features, suggesting that there really is some theory of geometry lurking around inside this thing that has been otherwise unnoticed. Now, it's important to understand that these things, it is marvelous to find this stuff here, but they're still pretty dumb. So this thing, given an in-painting mask to remove a bicycle wheel, has produced a bicycle wheel that simply would not rotate, but would collapse because the spokes are all in the wrong places, and a cat with two tails and an extremely odd pelvis, right? So the theory of how objects and worlds and geometry are put together isn't perfect. Another thing to notice about these methods is that the projective geometry is pretty iffy. So when I was putting the slides together the other night, I sat down and I went and just got from the internet a nice Stable Diffusion image that people were boasting about. This was the first one I got. There's nothing special about the choice process, and you can go look it up. It's intended to be Victorian and artistic and steampunky and a whole bunch of other stuff. And if you look at it at first glance, the vanishing points seem to be fairly well behaved, right? But actually, if you look at some details, the vanishing points are severely funky, right? This red line should have the same vanishing points as these green lines. Up here, this stuff on the window, the vanishing points should be where the green lines are. Now, we know that human artists play all sorts of games with vanishing points and are highly unsophisticated about them. Sometimes it increases a sense of perspective. You could argue that that was what was going on here, but the default argument is that things' projective geometry is a little bit shaky. And that seems the more likely conclusion. Now, of course, there's so what, right? Mostly I've been describing amusing things about complicated computer vision toys. Will this change the world? And the answer is it might. There are some very practical questions that are of interest here. We have a lot of current methods for imputing scene properties like depth and normal. Albedo's a little bit shaky, but we've got them. And they have some really obnoxious problems. One of the obnoxious problems is they consume huge amounts of labeled data, and there's a whole industry of producing and collecting labeled data for these methods. Another is they behave extremely badly when presented with lighting changes, shifts in images, all that kind of stuff. And there is mild evidence that, in fact, the smart thing to do is to use an image generator as a method for imputing scene properties. Right? Why? Because you don't have to train it with labeled data. And it knows about lighting and equivariance and all that stuff already. So how do we predict these scene properties? Well, we basically have a regression procedure that makes image-like things like depth, normal, albedo, whatever, from an image. We're really good at depth maps from single images. This may surprise people who don't do vision for a living, but it's gone from being something somewhat freakish about 14 years ago to routine, uninteresting. It's like water. You just turn on the tap and out comes the depth. We're really good at predicting normal maps from images. Same story. We're quite good at predicting albedo maps from images. There's a little bit of weirdness there, but not of particular interest. And essentially what we do is we encode the image with various methods to make features, and then we decode that to depth, normal, and albedo, and we just train it with a pile of data so that it predicts things right. SOTA is great. So what you're seeing over here in the horizontal axis is time from 2015 to 2023. In the vertical axis is root mean square error, and reliably depth error just goes down every year, and it goes down by quite a lot. We're really, really good at this. Same normals. The only annoying feature about this graph is the horizontal isn't as large a time period, and goodness goes up instead of down, because we measure the fraction of normals that we get almost right. And that is going up fast. Albedo is the same. So a lot of numbers here. Basically, the smaller number is the better number. If you look at the, well, we haven't got, yeah, I've got the years up there. If you look at the years, people are getting very small numbers. So we know how to do this stuff. The problem is it doesn't work very well when you stress it, right? So if you're interested in things like autonomous vehicles, whatever, you discover very quickly that depth estimators just hate rain, right? So I'm showing you an outdoor scene and an outdoor scene with simulated rain on it and the depth estimation for each, and it's clear that the thing has just gone to pieces. Semantic segmenters, which are another one of these things. So a semantic segmenter looks at a pixel and says, this is tarmac, this is tree, this is window, this is car, whatever. They hate rain as well. A perfectly decent segmentation on the left has turned into a truly vile mess of colors on the right. Now, I'm going to show you a horror movie, really nasty movie, adult audiences only kind of thing. Watch here. Same scene, the lighting is changing. So what we're then going to do is stick that scene into a depth estimator and a normal estimator. And you will notice the appalling outcome, right? The normals and the depths change when the lighting changes. But that has to be wrong. We know that changing the light can't change all this stuff. So if you're going to report this stuff, it should be the same each time. And our current technologies simply can't deal with that. There is another ghastly picture over here. This is from a paper that Yuan Yuzhong and Yuzhong Wang and I wrote. What I'm going to do is take an image and I'm going to crop it in two different ways, right? So you'll see a red crop and a blue crop. Then I'll stick it through a depth estimator. And where they overlap, the depths should be the same, but they're not. The normals should be the same, but they're not. Okay. There's a delicate question here, which is this just a question of camera calibration? And the answer is no, it isn't, because if it was camera calibration, everything would go wonky. And what's going on here is it's only local disruptions. So our existing technologies are very, very powerful, but they have huge and painful holes in them. So it may be the case that in the coming future, the way to actually predict depth, normal, albedo, all this stuff is to persuade an image generator to generate the image that you've got and then beat depth, normal, albedo information out of that. The path is a bit rocky, but there is some evidence that that actually, you actually get good behavior there. And the reason we've got evidence you get good behavior is here's an image that's lit a whole bunch of different ways. A recent regression SOTA produces these normals. A recent supervised SOTA supervised produces these normals. Style GAN's normals look like that. They are much, much less susceptible to changes in lighting. Why? Because it put the lighting there itself. So if you could persuade Style GAN or another image generator to generate the image that you actually have, then you could get reliably and in interesting ways well-behaved normals. Whoops. Okay, there are some questions. The big intellectual question posed by all of this is, and I think this is true for large language model generators, just generators in general, which is, how do we know what a generator should know? So Anand and I and Daniel and Derek had endless trouble with NeurIPS referees on this paper because half of them said it was completely obvious that the image generator knew this stuff. Why were we interested? And the other half said, this is astonishing that it knows this. So it's clear that there's a little bit of difficulty in knowing how to know what something should know. Right? It is important that we have a theory of when we should be surprised and when we should not be surprised. So to my mind, we should not be surprised that these things know depth, normal, albedo, and the like. It's an essential part of generating pictures. It is somewhat surprising that they know a bit of projective geometry. It is not that surprising that they're not great at global projective things like vanishing points. But you could wonder, what theory guides those intuitions? There is none right now, and we need one badly. Here's a little lanyard. This is just a piece of fun with a generative thing. I had a student who was very interested in generative models for style transfers. Generators can map things, so you don't have to just generate images. You can change them. What we'd like to do is to turn a face into a cartoon, and we want the expression controlled by the face and the style controlled by a random number. So here's a cartoon of this person's face, and the style of the eyes and stuff are going to be controlled by a random number. And the bit that's fun is she will sing a truly appalling piece of music with a heavy beat. And every time the beat hits, the random number will change and all of her style will change. And what is fun is that their face doesn't slip around all over the place in the cartoon. Now, this is just a little piece of fun. It's no more than that, but it's a nice thing to end on. And I'm done for the morning. Thank you.
Generated to produce a given image.
Okay, for StyleGAN, it's how do you convince a generator to produce a given image?
That's what you're suggesting,
yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so there is an established literature on this point. It's usually referred to as GAN inversion. As far as I know, nothing is known about inversion for stable diffusion, but you know, it basically it's getting worked out, right? For GAN inversion, for StyleGAN, essentially what you want to do is produce a network that predicts the style code that produces the image. Okay, there are a variety of important tricks involved. So up until relatively recently, what you could do was produce a network that produced a style code that gave you a picture that was quite like the picture you started with, but not actually the same, which is annoying. You then have to fiddle around with the structure of the generator. And if you do, you can get it to produce pictures that are precisely the picture you wanted it to produce. The hard bit is preserving the directions that also produce the normal and the depth. So the current state of the literature, as far as I know, is for StyleGAN, you can invert essentially perfectly, really, really well. And I could show a slide of that. But when you invert, the directions that you discovered that produce normal and albedo and relighting and all that jazz, they all change. So actually using the inverter is still a bit tricky. Okay. Again, I would regard that as the kind of thing that just gets cleaned up by reasonable groups of smart people in a reasonable period of time. There's no intrinsic obstacle to that problem. So, other questions?
So in your talk, you were kind of talking about how these like probes or regressors can give you properties like normals. On the language side, sort of the trend had been that, you could probe things like syntactic structure from BERT. And then like the language modeling trend was that then you could like few shot prompt for these things. And now you can just ask for a lot of properties. Do you think there's similar trends on this vision side or sort of rendering side of being able to do few shot or zero shot versions of these tasks in the future?
Counting shots is always a bit dubious. Anytime somebody wants to count shots, you got an issue. I would say the evidence is fairly strong that you need very little information to persuade a generator to make the stuff compared to the amount of information you need to persuade a regressor. Regressors are trained with hundreds of thousands to millions of things. Even the most aggressively fiddled with generator, we're talking about hundreds to thousands. I think maybe tens of thousands. Anand was talking about tens of thousands yesterday, but the orders of magnitude is significant. I think it's the essential difference here is the thing knows how to make these. You basically just need to find the configuration of codes that gets the stuff out. That requires very little information. Is that a zero-shot thing? Probably not. There is a more interesting line to think about here, which is opened by this, which is you could reasonably argue when you think about language and syntax, we kind of know what syntax is and where to look for it, right? For images, we have a holy trinity of intrinsics, which is depth, albedo, and normal. But we know that if you recover those and then render them, they don't look like the original image, which is kind of annoying, which suggests that there may be other intrinsics out there without names that we don't know about. And a very exciting thing you could think about here is, can I persuade these generators to yield them, right? Without necessarily knowing what they are or having data of them. That is open. It's exciting, it's open, it's uncertain. Okay. So I think, the thing about analogies between vision and language is you've got to take them with a tremendous amount of salt. They're helpful, but the amount of salt required is really significant.
Thank you. That was great.
Sorry, there's another question.
It's me.
Yeah.
So I want to harp on more on this idea that what should you be surprised at, like what these models know. To me, the idea of the cat, right? Like the cat has one tail, is a much more easy thing for these models, should have been much more easy thing for these models to learn than these projective geometries, surface normals. Like if you even think of how human knowledge has evolved over the centuries, we knew about one tail of cat much earlier than projective geometries and stuff like that and so on. So why is this the case? Like easy things are still harder for these models, whereas harder things might be easier for these models? Or, do you have any like?
I think the answer to that one is easy. These aren't trained in the same way that humans are, right? So we have many millions of years of evolution at our backs because our vision system is a kind of an early primate thing. Our color system is an early primate thing. And there were things swimming around with vision systems billions of years ago. These things are trained mostly in the presence of either explicit or implicit discriminators that chuck out images that are unconvincing, right? Almost certainly what's going on here is it's much easier to tell that you've blown it on the normal than that your cat is funky, right? The actual process of discrimination and selection is not that good at poorly constructed cats, really quite good at depth and normals. Varun, yeah, there was a question. Really quite good at depth and normals and kind of a bit shaky about projected geometry. On this question of what we should be surprised, if we had a list of these things, what they did well and what they did badly, then we could start asking, how do we make it better? But I completely agree with you. It doesn't have a sensible theory of cats. People do. Why does it not have a sensible theory of cats? Because it's learned about the visual world in ways that are completely alien to people.
Or is it like still working on the very low level features, and not like high level features? So I think
Is it still working on very low level features? Again, wouldn't it be nice to be able to give a coherent and sensible answer to that question? Right. You know, we could have a discussion roughly on the level where you say it's the low level features. I say it's the high level features. We disagree with each other and everybody's happy. But there's no way of resolving that question. It would be nice to have one because it would suggest a path forward. One of the big annoying issues about this whole subject is the utter mystery involved in the little gnomes that run around inside these generators. You know, random numbers goes in, pictures come out, mysterious stuff happens in between, and that's deeply unsatisfying.
Hi, great talk. I'm not a computer vision person, so maybe my question won't make as much sense, but the way I understand diffusion models, for example, there are many, many ways to generate images, but the way I understand diffusion models is that you run a forward diffusion process that takes some initial distribution and makes it you know, Gaussian noise or close to Gaussian noise, and then you do reverse the diffusion to generate the original image. And of course, there are lots of other bells and whistles on top of this. So I guess it's very interesting to figure out what these models know and what they don't know, but is it, I mean, all they can learn is sort of correlations in the initial distribution, right? I mean, they're essentially learning the initial distribution. So is it possible that the distribution of images and then generating something from that? So is the issue that, for example, when a cat has two tails, that there's not been trained enough, or what is the sort of the reason that some things are? I mean, this just seems like a random process.
The answer, yeah. Wouldn't it be nice to know the answer? I do want to identify one thing you want to be careful about. This language, all that it knows are correlations. This makes correlation sound like a bad thing. There are many multi-billion-dollar industries that live off correlations, and they make a good living. You can clearly generate images just by knowing about correlations. I think a better way of thinking about it is, why does it know about some but not others, right? Cats really don't have two tails and weird pelvises, but pixels really tend to be the same color as their neighbors. You might argue that getting the very, very deep stuff about objects and their structures is just really hard, and it'll come with more data and all that jazz. I kind of don't like that argument because it's annoyingly theory-free. I think we probably need conceptual machinery here to tell us what's going on, right? To resolve that sort of stuff. Sorry, there was a...
Great talk. Thanks, David. I've done very similar work, and one of the things that I have realized through my experience of trying to use diffusion models to do regression problems is that it seems easier to be able to extract or regress things for images that it has synthesized versus real world images. And part of the problem is we don't exactly know how to embed the real world images into the space of the diffusion models like you talked about. We know more about how to do that for like GANs, using pivotal tuning or inversion or encoders, but we don't seem to know that very well. So what are your thoughts on that, and what has been your experience with that?
Mostly, I would say it's going to come right in the next year or so. There's no reason to worry about it. The size of the industry and the intellectual industry and the number of smart people who are piling into this question. GAN inversion was a toy a couple of years ago. There's now a huge literature of people biting each other's ankles about the best number on inversion. So, Greg, you were going to... Whoops.
I'm supposed to use the mic as being recorded.
These are real images, just want to point out. Not synthesized.
Yeah, they're not synthesized. So either it's in the process of being sorted out or it already has been sorted out. I had a chat with Anand, and I've been suppressing details in the slide, as Greg points out. So no, it'll come right. No reason to worry about it.